Hi, everybody. This is Bob Smith. Before we get started in earnest on this show this week, as I record this, it's Sunday, May 11th, and word is getting all around the wrestling world that Terry Brunk, better known as Sabu, has died. The nephew of the legendary original Sheik went on to become every bit the legend himself. It all stems back to me to 1991 in Memphis when both Rob Van Dam and Sabu were in the USWA cutting their teeth. The Sheik had sent him to get a little experience, and they were both great guys, and there's Sabu flying all over the ring, just like I saw him do at Tri-State Wrestling Alliance cards. One of the great natural talents ever, and the fact that he was so full of daring do, willing to do anything to his body to entertain the fans. There was nobody else like him in the history of wrestling, so I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, but I do want to give my absolutely heartfelt condolences to everybody who knows Sabu, his fans, his friends, his loved ones, everybody. Sheik and Sabu, two legends. Thank you for everything, both of you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We got a big one for you this time. We got fellow podcaster Gene Jackson, and he's collaborated with Doug Gilbert on a brand new book about the great Eddie Gilbert. All that, and Bob and Joe will go toe-to-toe again here on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. It's like being at the big one without the chicken on a stick. Well, welcome back, everybody. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour, the only podcast that's all protein, no carbohydrate when it comes to pro wrestling. I got Joseph Puccio to giggle. His screen says he's Joseph, so here's Joseph Puccio, Esquire. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's something to try to crack you up. Try to change my name.
We use this electronic studio. We are not in the same room together, folks. And like most podcasts, you're in different places. Like you see on, news interviews now, somebody will be sitting in their home talking. So my name here is Bob Smith. It says, Bob Smith here. And Joe will try to make me laugh by putting different names in his slot here. Today he's Joseph. The last show we did, he was Giuseppe out of nowhere. What was that all about?
I guess I was in an Italian mood. I don't know. I was going to my roots there, but
you rascal, you.
And we'll see what happens next week and what I'm going to come.
I can't wait. It's going to be. Call yourself anything but late for dinner. Our guest tonight is the wonderful Gene Jackson. You know him as a podcaster who has another podcast here on our WrestleCopia podcast network. And he just co-authored with Doug Gilbert a new biography of Eddie Hot Stuff Gilbert. The book is out now. You can find it at Amazon. Just type in Eddie Gilbert book and it will come right up. You're going to want to hear what we have to say about this because you know what? It's a great project. And who would know Eddie Gilbert better than his brother Doug? And Gene, who is a real Southern wrestling fan, he has his podcast is the Wrestling Review, and it's mostly about the USWA. So he's the perfect person to co-author something like this. I had no idea he was a writer, and I had no idea that Gene Jackson is also a stand-up comic. He really is. Gets on stage and entertains people that way. I am shocked. So the multi-talented Gene Jackson and the unbelievable career of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, many different federations, many different guises. Is he a Hall of Famer, Joe?
I say yes.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. No matter what Hall of Fame you're talking about, I just think he had such an influence. You know, he booked ECW for a while. He got involved with the NWA booking committee for a while.
Yep.
A major star in Memphis. His feud with Lawler was the stuff of legend. And you know what I loved about the Lawler Eddie Gilbert feud? It wasn't constant over a long period of time. He would come, he would go. He would come, he would go. And every time he'd come back, they would rekindle their hatred for each other. I'll never forget the episode around 88 when Eddie Gilbert hit Lawler with his car, which is a piece of tape you have to see if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
That one really made a lot of headlines around the wrestling world because that's about as extreme as you could get in those days. And you know, the police actually showed up at the TV studio.
I have heard that before. Yeah, it might have been from you, but yeah.
People watching at home were convinced that he tried to run Lawler over. They said, "You got to go arrest that guy." So when they got to the studio, Lawler's like, "No, listen, here's what happened." But you know what? That's the beauty of Memphis wrestling. Those fans were passionate, especially about Lawler, whoever was the good guys at that point. And that was a classic moment in Memphis wrestling, even though it was slightly over the top, I would say. But shoot, what have we seen in WWE in the years since then? You know, Mr. McMahon's car blowing up. I mean, come on. This looks minor compared to that.
That's true. No, that's really cool. Admittedly, I did not know about the book before knowing about it from this show. And it's something I might have to seek out. I might have to get myself a copy of that because I've always been intrigued.
I have ordered my copy. I'm waiting for it to arrive in the mail as we speak. And
okay.
Yeah, it's available. I should say it is available at Amazon. You'll hear more about that later. And there's also the publisher's website you can get it from. But Amazon is very good. I as much as I really don't like Amazon, I probably ordered every one of my wrestling books from Amazon because they have them.
Right.
They have them in stock.
I might have to get myself a copy. I'm a little behind on my wrestling books. Unfortunately, I still have not started the WrestleMania 3 book from Keith Elliott Greenberg, but that's next on my list. But I think maybe after I finish that one, I might have to do a dive into this one. I've always been intrigued by Eddie Gilbert. You mentioned, is he a Hall of Famer? Yes, I think he is. Obviously, not only because of his wrestling ability, which he had tons of ability, he was awesome. His booking, his booking was legendary, and I also always appreciated the fact that he was just sort of like he went into a lot of different territories. He wrestled in so many different places. He had his hand in a lot of different things, and I will say, growing up, admittedly, I did not see a lot of him as it was happening. I grew up with watching mostly WWF, but I did try to watch as much other promotions as possible, mostly the NWA and WCW, things like that, AWA. But I didn't get to watch a lot of the Memphis stuff when I was growing up until I got the tapes. I was a big tape trader. And seeing the things that you just mentioned and the angles and the car angle and just the different things that he did, he was in a lot of ways, he was kind of ahead of his time. I think his mind for the business was ahead of its time, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things he did. And if you think about it, he also did, if you remember, he also worked for the WWF.
Yes, he did. And
he had a very brief stint there.
Well, it was 8 months, probably 8 months, 9 months.
Yeah, and about a year or so.
He was in as a white bread babyface, looking very young, because he was very young. Mm-hmm. And he became Bob Backlund's protege for a while.
Yes, I remember.
And I will never forget Eddie for beating my favorite wrestler, Baron Mikel Cicluna, at Madison Square Garden. So it's a memory I always had. I went, oh, Cicluna will beat Gilbert. No, he didn't. Because I knew about Eddie Gilbert from, being a magazine guy and seeing his name in wrestling and stuff like that. Here's a little trivia speaking of the wrestling magazines. When he was a kid, Eddie Gilbert wrote to Inside Wrestling of the Wrestler. They used to have a pen pal section.
Uh-huh.
And he was in the pen pal section. You see a little picture of young Eddie Gilbert. Even though his dad was a wrestler, he was so into it. And then I'm sure people remember he was a photographer before he started anything else. He was shooting ringside photos, just like Paul Heyman did and other young guys who were associated with the business at that point. A wrestling lifer. The only thing I don't like about Eddie Gilbert is that he's gone.
And so young.
Mm-hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't even think he was 35. I think he was 33 or 34.
I don't even want to guess at this point. I'm going to check the book out for the exact date on that. But I will say this: in my dealings with him, I considered him, and I told Bill after this, he was an absolute Southern gentleman. That's the way I looked at him. My dealings with him, I would go visit Todd Gordon at the 2300 Arena, and I would talk to Eddie when he was there. He was always very accommodating because he had met me at our offices. Here's a moment for you. Coming to our offices to visit one day, to visit Bill Apter, were coming to our offices to visit Bill Apter one day were Eddie Gilbert and Missy Hyatt, who were wrestling's #1 couple at that point.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And that was a moment we all had a blast meeting them and enjoying their company and going to lunch and stuff. So I don't know what to say other than my dealings with Eddie were nothing but spectacular and a lot of fun. And you will hear when you hear the interview, my other connection, Eddie Gilbert, which should make you laugh your ass off once I tell you this, but you got to wait to hear the show because I don't want to say it twice here.
Yeah.
I have another connection to Eddie that's really stupid, and I think you'll enjoy it.
I'm looking forward to hearing that for sure.
It's really stupid, so I'm hoping the idiocy of it will add to the entertainment value of it.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, you mentioned, it's funny you mentioned Missy Hyatt too. That just jogged my memory. Eddie Gilbert was actually married to both Missy Hyatt and Medusa.
Phenomenal. Gosh, you see, this is why I was never meant to be a serious wrestling journalist in terms of journalism. Oh, they're married. This is a married wrestling couple. I still think this about everybody. I thought it was their business. I didn't care that they got together, and I didn't care that they broke up. It's your business when you marry someone. That's who you're fond of at that point. I don't know what happened with Medusa. You know what? I don't want to know. Am I weird?
No. I mean, as far as the personal lives or whatever, no, I don't think you're weird at all. I mean, who cares what's between them? But it's pretty, it's interesting. I mean, I think, and again, I'd have to look this up, but I think it was like right after one another. I think, and Missy Hyatt and Medusa had a feud in WCW at that point as well. So it's kind of interesting that
when you think about it, he was married to probably, if you look at the wrestling of that era, yeah, they may have been the two top sex symbols in wrestling at that point.
At that point, they were. I want to say like 88, 89, 90.
Yeah. So we'll have to read the book to find out the real ins and outs of all that stuff. But yeah, I just and I've had my dealings with Doug Gilbert too back in '91 when I went to Memphis to visit. And again, you know what? Doug was good. Doug was real good. I remember him as the Black Patriot in Global. Or the Dark Patriot. The Dark Patriot.
Dark Patriot. That's right. The Dark Patriot.
The Dark Patriot. And very few people knew who that was. But he was really good in that role. He was good with a mask on. He worked really well with a mask on. He had that look. I think he was a little bigger than Eddie, so he had a little more bulk to him. And he was a good heel. Wild angles in Memphis, wild brawls. Everybody has wild brawls in Memphis. And that's why I love Memphis, because it would like the controlled chaos of Memphis wrestling. It was one of my favorite things that I enjoyed back in the day.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, he like I just said, I mean, he's been in Memphis was just one place he was in. I mean, I also remember his time in I remember specifically getting tapes of his time in the UWF, in 85, 86, 87, whenever that was, working for Bill Watts. I remember he had that stable. Who was it? It was Rick Steiner. You could always tell, though, he was always so good. You knew he was the real deal. You knew he was a good star. You knew he was a great worker, obviously. He was great on the mic. Just an all-around great performer. He was a true professional wrestler,
Yeah, nobody ever better with the mic in his hand. Really believable. Yeah, very believable. And just terrific. Yeah, people forget I think he also booked Continental for a while.
Oh, did he? Continental as well?
And ran some unbelievable. Oh gosh, I don't want to talk about them now because I talk about them later. But we're gonna talk about a couple of wild angles that he was involved in. I mean, really wild, walking a tightrope of good taste angles. That type of thing. We'll talk about them in the second part of the show. So yeah. And by the way, Gene Jackson, if you've never met Gene, he is a You think I know wrestling? I'm nothing compared to Gene Jackson. Gene knows everything there is to know about Southern wrestling. He knows everything he knows about NWA and WWE wrestling. He's one of those guys that's a walking encyclopedia, and I envy that because he really knows his stuff.
Just from here and hearing the podcast and from your conversations, he's really knowledgeable. So definitely looking forward to reading this and hearing him.
These WrestleCopia guys are unbelievable. Dave Dynasty knows everything there is to know about Dick the Bruiser Bedlam in the WWA. They also have Dan Kennedy, who is the host of the Pure Wrestling Academy, which is, to my knowledge, the only American-based Japanese wrestling podcast that's out there.
Yeah.
And it's a history lesson in every single show. It's amazing. So I don't know how Ray gets them together, but we've got all these hosts that are real experts in certain aspects of pro wrestling, and I'm proud to be in that number, as the old song says.
Yeah, and what's great, like you said, I mean, it's the only Japanese one. I mean, there's something for everyone. There's like, if you're not interested in this and you don't want to hear about, the Memphis stuff, you want to hear the Japanese stuff, you want to hear old WWF, you want to hear old Jim Crockett stuff. I mean, there's something. It doesn't matter what territory you like, you'll always find something,
There's the show that talks about the Monday Night Wars.
Right.
That's the name of the show.
I know. That's another good one. Yeah.
It's like, and then there's the other shit podcast, which is a mishmash. It's a stew. You never know what you're going to hear from week to week. Sometimes they don't talk about wrestling at all. They talk about food. So it's like, you know what? I envy that. I would love to have a show where I can talk about hot dogs.
Hey, me and you should go on guest on that show and talk about hot dogs and Carvel.
Doggone right. Who knows more about Carvel? This is our third mention of Carvel on the By the way, I have gotten so many complimentary Facebook messages about, yes, I remember this Carvel, and people have their own memories of Carvel and the Tom Carvel commercials, which was one of the highlights of the 1980s as far as entertainment world, as far as I'm concerned. Those commercials were boss. And most people agreed that they liked the traditional Carvel cake better than Fudgy the Whale or Cookie Puss.
Really? Well, I'm glad I'm not alone, because I thought after I had that opinion, I thought I was gonna be in the minority there, but I'm glad.
We forgot a cake. Wiki the Witch for Halloween.
Wiki the Witch.
Wiki the Witch. I'm telling you.
Don't remember that.
I may be mispronouncing Wiki, but they had a witch cake for Halloween.
Really?
Yes.
Well, being that I've already, as we've discussed in the past, I've already had my Fudgy, I've already had my Cookie Puss, I've had the traditional. If that is the case, and if they still make it, I'm going to make it a point to, in 2025, have a Wiki the Witch.
My friend, that would be an insult to Tom Carvel if they don't recreate all of his children's oriented cakes. They have to. That's such. Oh, Tom Carvel. At your participating Carvel store. Come get Cookie Puss. Look at him. He's got a cone for him. How do you think of that, kids, huh? Isn't that something? That's a terrible impersonation of Tom Carvel, but you know what? It's not that far off, is it?
Yeah. But hey, WWE came back with their superstar ice cream bars, so why can't we have old Tom Carvel ice cream cakes from the 80s?
I am sure, I hope that lineage never goes away, even though Tom is, and I'm sure that the corporation is different than it was when he ran it. I just hope that they never, you know what? First of all, I like the fact that they're individual franchises.
Right, yeah.
It's a franchisee type business. And second, because I know people right up the street in my town who have a Carvel who have been there for at least 25 years.
Yeah, yeah.
You can make a good living doling out Cookie Puss.
Who would have thunk it?
I love it. That's the American way right there.
Who would have thunk that Cookie Puss is so lucrative?
Listen, we have totally neglected the other delights you can get at Carvel that aren't cakes. The flying saucer is the best ice cream sandwich in the world.
Yeah.
Particularly when it's fresh. And that's a big sticking point with me. It's got to have, when you bite into that sandwich, it's got to crunch in your mouth. Right? It's got to break in your mouth. It's got to be the fresh, crunchy cookie. Now, if you unfortunately pick up a pack that's older, it will mush in your mouth. First of all, the ice cream will be, the cookie will just be mush, and the ice cream will be too hard to bite through. You got to let them temper, my friends. Let them temper. But if you get a fresh flying saucer, Katie bar the door, baby. Woo!
Yeah, I hear you.
And what other delights do they have? They have that the cone that's already pre-made. If you go, usually when you walk in, you see the ice cream counter there, and you slide the door open on the top, and there's a variety of individual treats.
Yeah.
They also have, I think they still have. They used to call it Thinny Thin in the day. The diet ice cream, right?
Oh, okay.
Thinny Thin. But now
they have Carvel Light.
Now it's Carvel Light, right? It's not Thinny Thin anymore. And I don't know what's in it. I would probably like it. You know what? I used to work for a company called Stewart's Ice Cream in upstate New York.
Okay.
And it was based in Saratoga Springs. They're clicking this show off left and right now. Anyway, they were up. It was up Saratoga Springs. And I had one of the local franchises. I worked at one of them. And they had ice milk. You've ever heard of ice milk? It was ice cream without the fat content. They would ladle the fat out and make it with skim milk. And they had all the different flavors, but it was called ice milk and not ice cream. And it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could both use some ice milk right now, couldn't we?
I would love
We were talking about exercising before we logged on here. And it's like we both think we needed to lose a couple pounds so we can't have ice cream. Or we could have Thinny Thin.
Yeah, we could have Thinny Thins or we could have Carvel Light,
Carvel Light, yeah.
Whatever, whatever's
right. And that's what makes Carvel a great American institution. Long may it dole.
Yes.
Long may it scoop, I should say. Scoop out them. Oh my gosh, have you ever had a Carvel Lanch?
I have not.
You know what that is? No. It's similar to the McDonald's, what is it? The McFlurry? Only it's like twice as big, and it's got Carvel ice cream instead of McDonald's ice cream and a variety of things that they mix into it. Okay. Absolutely sublime, folks, the Carvel Lanch.
I wonder if Eddie Gilbert was a Carvel fan.
I think all wrestlers are Carvel fans.
Yeah.
Because they're on the road.
You never know. He might have been a Baskin Robbins guy.
I know Mick Foley was an ice cream fan. I know that much.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. All right. Enough about Carvel. Carvel, and your participating Carvel ice cream dealership. We're gonna talk with Gene Jackson about this exciting new book about Eddie Gilbert. Joe, it's good to have you here, my friend. Always a pleasure. I'm hoping that we're not too whimsical for our aging, falling over fan base. But no, we have a good time. Listen, I wouldn't talk about Carvel if we hadn't had such a nice response to our previous shows talking about Carvel. Maybe we'll get a sponsorship.
Hey, that would be awesome, man. You never know what's going to strike a chord. I mean,
why don't I contact the Carvel people and say, would you come on and be our sponsor of our show, our podcast, our popular wrestling podcast? We always chart, and we love Thinny Thin.
That would be incredible. These things happen organically sometimes. And again, speaking about the reaction, you never know what's going to strike a chord with.
No, you never do.
And these are things that we, for this listeners, the majority of listeners who are of our age, I think these are things that we grew up with. These are the things that we have great memories about. It's not just about wrestling. It's about Carvel.
Listen, if Disco Inferno could get over, we could be sponsored by Carvel. So as we sit here wistfully hoping for things that aren't going to happen, we will hit you with a short commercial break, and then we're bringing on the great Gene Jackson, talking about Eddie Gilbert and Doug Gilbert. Don't go anywhere if you know what's good for you. Get yourself. What kind of drinks does Carvel have? They serve drinks? Ice cream shake. Get a shake.
Yeah, I don't know if they have shakes, do they?
Oh yeah, they got shakes. Okay. They got malteds too.
I've never been a big ice cream shake fan, so I don't know. But okay.
What's wrong with you?
Now you know why. This is a conversation for another time. But to me, I want to eat my ice cream. I don't want to drink my ice cream, and that's why.
Oh, an aristocrat. Anyway, let's get out of here. Here's a commercial break, and then we're right back with Memphis Wrestling. We'll be right back. It's your one-stop shop for great wrestling. WrestleCopia.com, where you'll find an armload of great wrestling podcasts. Some are weekly, some are not. All of them are great. Ray Russell brings WrestleCopia to you, including his own show, The Wrestling Memory Grenade. There's Regional Wrestling, The Wrestling Stew with Bob Roop, the Puro Wrestling Academy, Retro Wrestling Review with Gene Jackson, Dave Dynasty's Wrestling Nostalgia, Monday Warfare Raw vs. Nitro, the Other Shit Podcast, the Captain's Corner Podcast, and much, much more. Great hosts, great shows. I guarantee you'll learn something every time you tune in to the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Where do you find all these shows? How about starting it this way? Just log on to WrestleCopia.com. There's nothing else like it anywhere. I thought I was busy. Right, guys? I mean, I always complain about how busy I am putting this podcast together and my other podcast too, but I know somebody who's probably busier than I am. His name is Gene Jackson. You know him from the Retro Wrestling Review podcast. You know him from his work with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. You may know him as a stand-up comic. You may know him as an author soon. It's Gene Jackson. He does it all. How are you? Good to see you again.
I'm good, Bob. Thanks for having me, man. I had such a great time the last time I was on your show and when you were on my show. So pleasure to be back.
So much has gone on since then. As we record this, here's the thing. I was complaining in recent shows that I had done 8 interviews in 5 days. So the shows get stacked. You know, it's not a prescient show. We don't do like WrestleMania shows and all that stuff. But I have to ask you, what did you think of WrestleMania this year? I was deadly disappointed in it.
You know, I've tried to not be the guy that, you know, gripes and complains about current wrestling because I just don't watch a lot of it, hardly at all. But I do make it a point to watch the WWE pay-per-views most of the time. What I've been telling people, my takeaway on this is, if you could have took the main event from night 1, swapped it out for the main event of night 2, and WrestleMania was just night 2, it would have been a pretty good show. Most of the card for night 1, I could have done without. I enjoyed the main event with Punk and Roman and Seth. I was going into the weekend fired up about Cody and John Cena. And, you know, I liked the Elimination Chamber thing as it played out. I didn't love it going into it, the whole Cody soul and all that. I was like, I don't know about this. But then I liked the way it played out. I didn't really love the first Cena heel promo I was okay with. And then each week I liked it a little less. The fact that we kept having Cody leaving him laid out and he just oversold it to me. It looked like he'd been shot in the ring each Cena did each time. And then the match. Oh my God, man. I still don't know exactly what I saw there. The Travis Scott aspect of it. I hated everything about that match.
Me too.
And I don't want to be that guy, but I can't help it.
First of all, and they'll never admit this, but Cena as a wrestler is done. He doesn't even fall realistically now. You know what I'm saying? And I just mean technically, he looks uncomfortable. He looked uncomfortable a couple of years ago when he was in the match against
Austin Theory.
Yes, the Theory match, Austin Theory. He looked uncomfortable then. He looked slow and plodding in comparison, and he looks slow and plodding even worse now. But that's not even half of it for me. The part of it with me that I couldn't get past, I didn't buy his turn. Not at all.
Yeah.
His reasoning for turning made no sense. And the more he talked about it, the more gobbledygook it got. There's all this psychological stuff. It just wasn't working for me. I think they would have done better with a upbeat farewell tour in terms of dollars and cents. I mean, who wants to pay a ticket to see this guy as champion? I don't know about that. I don't get any of this. However, you know, the WrestleMania itself, the women's match on night 2 was great.
Oh, amazing.
I thought the sleeper match of the whole weekend was LA Knight and Fatu. I thought that was a tremendous match. I really enjoyed that one.
I enjoyed it, and anybody that knows me knows I am so not an LA Knight fan.
Yes, we talked about that before, yes.
And so I went into that match, I'm like, all right, I like Jacob Fatu, but boy, I don't like LA Knight. But I had to admit, when it was over with, it was a good match. Even LA Knight's part of it, so I did like that. But yeah, and I'm not even a women's match guy. I'm not even going to get into all that. People call me sexist or anything, but I'm just not a big fan of the women's division. That 3-way women's match, I'm not even a fan of 3-way matches either. So just, I had a lot going against it. And when it was over with, it's like, I mean, that's a great way to start the show. But then again, what are you going to do to top that? I mean, you've set the bar pretty high, and after night one set the bar so low, it's like, well, all right, let's see what they do here. But yeah, man, I kind of, like I say, I liked the Cena turn as far as like the change of expression and all that. And I thought, all right, well, everybody's been hollering they want Cena to turn heel for freaking 15 years. So now you got it. Let's see what you want to do with it. But the execution of it from there, Bob, I agree. Not well done.
It wasn't logical. The juxtaposition from the Rock wanting his soul, and then he disappears, and then you have a griping John Cena for what? Being rich and famous? Seriously, no. It makes no sense. He was none of it made any sense to me, and it ruined the whole damn thing. And the quality of the match, like I said, it was like Dominic DeNucci versus Sweet Hansen in 1979. It just didn't work.
And against all odds, they had gotten Cody over as a babyface, and I don't know what you've done to that now. That may be ruined at this point. I don't know. Salvage that.
For a year since he won that title, he's been working from underneath. He's not a dominant champion. You know what I'm saying? It's like you don't look and go, oh, nobody's beating Cody. No, every time Cody wrestles, you think somebody could beat him because he's been beaten up by The Rock next to a bus. He's been sneak attacked 1,000 times, right?
Yeah.
Bloodied up several times. He's an underneath champion. I don't know how much longer you can sustain that with him getting his ass kicked, to be honest with you.
Well, like I say, I don't know if the way that title change went down was just insurmountable. And then you got, and not to turn this podcast into, current stuff, but this whole aspect of The Rock going on shows and even on the post show of Elimination Chamber and just openly talking about storylines and what plans are and how we got coming into that damn press conference after Elimination Chamber and basically just kind of talking a little too openly, in my opinion, about how they even got to the Cena turn and all that. I was just like, I know this ain't 1985, but we can't just immediately after the show just openly talk about storylines that we're just kicking off or in the middle of this. And then he's on Busted Open or whatever he was on, Pat McAfee, I guess it was. And he's like, yeah, and Cody's going to have a heel turn in the future and all this. I'm like, what are we doing, man? Like, and now they got this new show where the whole crux of the show is them showing the behind the scenes and how the stories are crafted and he's okay. He's selling. It's like, are we really, is this where we really want to go with this? I don't know, man.
At the end of last year's WrestleMania, I was very enthusiastic about WWE. I thought it was minute rights perfect. I thought, the fans were excited. The attendances drew it. They proved it. But in the last 6 months, it's just been kind of self-indulgent. And, it's like, it's so slick now and so over the top. And everything's the biggest crowd, the best thing, the blah, blah, blah. The hype is really overarching now. Yeah. Hype. And it's getting old. It's grating. Does everything have to be the biggest, the greatest, the best, the all time? It's getting... the braggadocio, I don't know how much is it TKO, the other company that they're hooked up with? It's like, I think they know how to make money and they're making money hand over fist. But I'm going YouTube, right? Not YouTube, excuse me, Facebook. And I'm looking at people post seats they paid $400 for and you can't even see the ring.
Insane.
You have to squint to look for it. I'm offended. I'm absolutely offended. You know what? Keep raking your fans over the coals with bad booking and prices that are unbelievable. You have to mortgage. I was talking to another guest. You have to mortgage your future to get second row WWE tickets at a house show.
And then you might get a four-wheeler slammed into you if you're front row.
Yeah.
And you made one term you used there. You said self-serving, and I know the premise is that Tony Khan and Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker did it, unbeknownst to him and against his will. But having Triple H headline the Hall of Fame and give an hour and 10-minute speech, you talk about self-indulgent and self-serving, and you had guys like Steve Austin, Bret Hart, and CM Punk out there going, yeah, we've got 2 minutes. And then Triple H goes out there and talks till 3:00 in the morning. I don't know, man. I've been all for Triple H up until now, but yeah, I expected WrestleMania. I thought, as excited as we all were coming out of last year's WrestleMania, probably this year's WrestleMania would top that. And then at the end of the night, Sunday night, it's just like, I don't know what we're doing here. They're going to have to right the ship pretty quick, and I don't know how you're going to do that.
I have a goal for 2025, and I talked about this on the show, and I shouldn't say it publicly, but I'm working on it right now. I want to talk to Triple H. I really do. And my big question to him is just a real simple one. Does today's WWE give a tinker's cuss about a fan with as much as one gray hair? The people who have followed you for decades and seeing how things have evolved into something that's almost unrecognizable from what it was when I was a kid, when I started watching it in 1972, right?
Yeah.
Do you care about people like us? Do we count? Is there anything for us anymore? Or is it all marketing to a certain demographic? And I think that's a logical question to ask.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it feels like, no, they don't really care about anything but what's hot and hip. The only reason you have Travis Scott interfering in a match is because he's like one of today's, music stars.
Yeah.
But I have, something, even back to the old days, I don't care about celebrities getting involved in wrestling. It's out of place. I've never liked it. I didn't like the people at WrestleMania 1 who were, not wrestlers. Mr. T and all that. I had no use for it.
But, in the past, even like Mr. T, even though he was smaller than the wrestlers, he was muscled up and he looked like he could handle himself even if he couldn't, and different, athletes over the years. But Travis Scott looks like you just pulled him straight out of the crowd. Like, I'm 47 years old. I don't know who the hip rappers are. I don't know who any of these people are. They go, oh, we got a celebrity in the crowd. I never know who 90% of these people are. But Travis Scott looks like you just picked him out of them $400 cheap seats, if you want to call them that, and then let him come in the ring like he's a Make-A-Wish person or something. Like he doesn't look like a star. He doesn't carry himself like a star. He doesn't look imposing. Oh my gosh, him to be the sole, person that affected the finish of the title match of the night, to me, just completely ruined any chance that had of getting over, because it just seemed absurd that he brought the title match to a screeching halt. But and as far as you talking to Triple H, man, there's no reason you can't get in that room for those press conferences. I mean, I know that require you to go to these things.
There are people who are far less accomplished than I am in those press conferences. So it's like, I haven't even attempted to contact anybody, but I'm going to, because I know too many people. I know people who actually work there. So I'm going to ingratiate myself and see if worst they can say is no, right? But I'm going to try it. But I will say this. The constant outside interference and distractions at ringside, it's epidemic on every show. It doesn't matter if it's Raw or SmackDown or probably a house show. Somebody's going to run out and do something.
Yeah.
And virtually 90% of the matches. It's not satisfying to me. It's not satisfying. Why can't we have clean finishes? I mean, it's just constant run-ins, and it's getting old for me. They got to be more creative than that.
But that's why I don't watch it week to week. I don't watch it. I'll drop in and watch the pay-per-view, because you can watch the pre-show or even just the lead into the matches. You can catch up with everything you missed for the last month. You don't have to watch this stuff every week. They give you everything you need to know why they're having this match. I can't sit through 3-4 hours of Netflix and SmackDown and all that. I'll go on YouTube and keep up with the main angles. That's it, man. I can't. I just don't. I got too many, like you said, more leading in. I've got 3 or 4 podcasts I do, and now I'm writing books and stuff, and I don't have time to watch something. This is going to make me mad, and then I'm going to need another podcast to vent about it. So I just don't subject myself to it.
You just segued. Okay. We'll talk about the book. You say you're an author now, and you are. As this podcast hits the podcast airwaves or whatever they call them, there's a brand new book called Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, The Uncrowned King of Professional Wrestling, by Doug Gilbert, Eddie's brother, and the fellow I'm talking to, Gene Jackson. Congratulations on the release of this book.
Well, thanks, man. And thank you for having me on the show. I've had a lot of fellow podcasters and podcasters that I consider to be friends that have reached out and have wanted me to perpetuate getting Doug Gilbert on their show, but they didn't have any interest in having me on. So thank you for asking me to come on. And you didn't even mention Doug. So I thank you for that. But Yeah, not to turn this into a long story, but I haven't really gone into this anywhere. But about 15, 16 years ago, or a little more than that, I guess, I said, you know what? I want to write a book. And I started looking for a wrestling related topic. And there was a lot of misinformation out there about Eddie Gilbert, a lot of assumptions about how he died and different things. And I was like, you know what? I'd like to do a book about Eddie Gilbert. And I reached out to Mr. Tommy Gilbert, Miss Peggy Gilbert on Facebook and talked to them at length. And they were on board with it. And I couldn't get a hold of Doug at the time. Doug was going to Japan a lot. He was really busy wrestling and plus other real life things. And quite honestly, Miss Peggy's like, Doug's just really not ready to really talk about all that. He's still dealing with it. It was rough for all of us, but him especially. So I never really got to talk to Doug back then. So I started working on a book. I talked to a lot of people. My goodness, there was a lot of different people in the business I spoke with and had got a lot of stuff prepared. And then I went through a divorce at the time and a lot of stuff in my personal life. And I kind of put the book on a hard drive and set it aside. And I didn't come back to it. 15 years passed and I didn't come back to it. And one night I'm in here doing prep work for a podcast, and Doug McKay, it may or may not be somebody listening to the show recognizes the name Doug McKay. He used to wrestle, and he's been on the news. He was one of the newsletter guys back in the day, whatnot. He hits me up and he says, "Hey," he said, he's like, "You never finished that book about Eddie, did you?" And I said, No, I never did. I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, Doug Gilbert called me tonight and was asking about it. He had heard you were working on it one time. And he was asking whatever happened to it, and he wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So Doug, he gave me Doug's number. I called Doug, and me and him have a couple of conversations about it. And he's like, "Well, I've worked off and on a book for years." And he said, "You've worked on this book." And he said, "Would you be interested in maybe working together on the thing and getting it done?" And I said, yeah. I said, man, I don't know, Doug, if I have time. I got all these podcasts going on. I'm doing stand up, different things. And I said, "Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" And I wasn't even pitching me. I was just like, "Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" I mean, because basically what, Doug was like, "I want to get these stories out there about my brother and about my dad and me." And he said, "I feel like a book's the only way to do it." I was like, "Well, a book's a great way to do it, but podcasts are a big thing now. You ever thought about doing that?" And he's like, "I wouldn't know how to go about it." And I said, you just find somebody you trust and sit down with them each week and record a podcast, pick a subject, and record a podcast." And he's like, "Well, you do these things, don't you?" And I'm like, "I've been known to do a podcast or two." And we got to talking, and then we met up at I went to Jonesboro, Arkansas to a convention they were having there to promote my USWA podcast. And it just so happens my table ended up right next to Doug and Tommy's table. So we were sitting across from each other all day. And by the end of the day, we had dangerous conversations, but it was at its beginning, it was just me and Doug. And then 3 months later, we did an interview with Tommy at the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame, and Tommy had such a good time being a guest on the show. He said, "Man, I wish I could just do this with y'all every week." And me and Doug were like, "Why couldn't you? Come on." And so Tommy joined the show, and it's been a lot of fun, but we're getting away from the book, I guess.
But you know what? A struggle. Since when does a wrestler make an appearance and go, "I want to be part of the show"? That's impossible.
Yeah.
That's very rare.
And he has a great time. Like, Tommy looks forward to us recording each week. He's picked a lot of the topics, and we just, three of us sitting around talking about their careers and Eddie's career and, Mr. Gilbert. We just have a great time doing it. So it's cool that people enjoy listening to it and they like sending in questions because, we'd probably do it anyway if we weren't recording it because, it brings back a lot of memories for Tommy because I'm a wrestling nerd. So I bring, he's always like, "Man, you bring up stuff I ain't thought of in 30 years, and it kind of brings it back. But as far as the book goes, after we started doing the podcast, Doug, unbeknownst to most people, Doug did this Dark Side of the Ring episode with Vice TV back last summer, and they shot that. And I guess a publisher got wind that, that Dark Side episode's coming up, and Doug's doing this podcast and everything, and approached him about doing a book. And Doug, reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, would you want to help me do a book?" Because originally they wanted to do a book about the whole family, and this was like in the end of December. And he's like, "Hey, they want us to do a book about my family." And I said, "Well, what's the deadline?" He's like, "Well, they want it by like the end of April." I said, "Doug, that's like 4 months to write a book about you and your family. Like, that's crazy." And he's like, "Well, yeah, but you think we could get it done?" And I said, "I don't know. Not with the schedule we're keeping on the podcast and everything." And so we talked about it a little more, and we said, "Well, what if we pitch to them? We do this Eddie book that we've always wanted to do first, and then circle back to doing a book about you and your dad. Because honestly, if we do a book about all three of you, one of two things is going to happen. Either we're going to leave a lot of stuff out, or it's going to be the Bible. It's going to be this forever for people to sit down and read." So he pitched it to the publisher, like, "Hey, what if we just do a book about Eddie?" Like, "That's great. We love that." And so we went to work on it. We ended up putting Dangerous Conversations on a bit of a hiatus there for a little while so we could focus on the book. I put my retro wrestling YouTube show on hiatus, and really dug in on getting the book done and going back and rewatching as much of Eddie's angles from Memphis and Mid-South and WCW and Continental and ECW and everywhere. I mean, we lived and breathed Eddie for 3 months. It was fun. We kind of went back and watched everything that he did. And I had a great time reading this book, writing this book, and me and Doug are very proud of it. It's written in Doug's voice, from Doug's perspective, because who else has more insight into Eddie Gilbert than Doug?
I don't think there's anybody on the planet that could do it.
Absolutely.
Seriously, because there's the passage of time too.
Yeah.
Many of his associates probably aren't around anymore either. So it's like the perfect person to collaborate with. Obviously, and he'll have personal, anecdotes that nobody else could come up with. I mean, it's like just natural.
Yeah. So I was glad it worked out the way it did. I told him, I'm glad I never finished it before, because, I wouldn't have had all this insight and stories that only you had. And he wasn't ready to talk about it all back then. So this was kind of a perfect timing. And we had already been doing the podcast and had been talking about Eddie and looking up things. He had just did that Vice episode. And, so him and his wife had went through, and, he's got a lot of Eddie's memorabilia and different things, and they had went through all that and pulled all that out to show the Vice people. So all this was kind of fresh in everyone's mind. So it was really the perfect time to do it. And then, of course, as we record this, I don't know when this comes out, but, next week, the Vice episode about Eddie comes out on Vice. And I'm interested to see how that's presented.
Yes. This will be a couple weeks after that this comes out, just to let you know, in front of everybody. I might as well just say it. And only because, like, Gene and I were talking for the show, I had done 8 shows in 5 days, and I've been just kind of editing and producing as I've been going along. So, so I'm doing in the order of which I did the interviews. You know the feeling. You of all people should know the feeling.
100%.
Yeah. It's well, that's why we're all rich and famous now, right?
I'm still waiting for it. That's what I hear. Waiting for that Conrad money to come rolling in.
Yeah. For some reason, I'm sitting here thinking about Eddie in Global. For somebody that's popping in my mind, he must have been miserable doing that show. And I'll tell you why. When they were on ESPN, right? Were they on like every day at one point? It was insane. And he was great on the show. But they were doing, ESPN was doing stuff like optically censoring the matches when he threw a fireball and stuff like that. And it couldn't have been, the shows were all disjointed and they seemed rushed, and it couldn't have been a good situation for him. As creative as he is, how do you deal with all that? I thought that must have been a low point for him.
Yeah, it was frustrating. Because I asked Doug, I said, how do you book that much TV? How do you even tape that much TV? And he's like, well, every Friday night we were there taping, 2, 3, 4 hours of matches. And he's just constantly, of course, Eddie, he said Eddie's mind from, sun up to sundown, the time he got out of bed to the time he got back in it, was thinking about wrestling. He, he lived and breathed it. And Doug said, you'd run into him and any time of the day, you'd be eating dinner or whatever. And Eddie's like, what do you think of this? And he's pitching an angle. That was how his mind worked. So it wasn't a problem for him to come up with that much TV, but to execute it and convey it to everybody. And then, like you said, and then to see what you came up with being, altered in such a way was frustrating. And so, I don't know that he considered it a low point, but it certainly was a frustrating point. And that's just, I rattled off all the different stuff, and I forgot to mention Global. And that's a pretty key time because he chose to go book Global over returning to WCW because it was really important to Eddie to be able to book. He loved booking. He loved that creative outlet, and that was what was most important to him.
Well, that's the last time I talked to him in person when I was visiting Todd Gordon in Philadelphia, and I when Eddie was booking ECW. And first of all, he remembered me, which I was shocked. The last time I'd seen before that, him and Missy had come up to our offices in New York and visited. Yeah. We all had a nice time there, but it was about, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years after that. I see him. He says, "Yeah, I remember you." And we talked for a while. And to me, he was like, seriously, I mean this with sincerity. He was like the ultimate Southern gentleman. Eddie was. I thought he was raised right. He just came off that way as somebody who considered other people's feelings when they were talking to him, and that I think he was kind of a cool guy in that way. He was just like normal.
Yeah.
I mean, in a business way. I'm not talking anything about wrestling. I mean, when he met you, you could have a conversation. It was yes sir, no sir. You know what I mean? It was like, unlike most wrestlers who were like, "How you doing?" They squeeze your hand to prove how strong they are. Those type of wrestlers. Eddie was just like a normal guy, and I always appreciated that about him.
Eddie started out, the first thing he did in wrestling was writing for newsletters and magazines, and taking pictures. And, he was friends with Bill Apter. Mm-hmm. And so Eddie had a lot of respect for what guys like you did. And Eddie understood the important role that you guys played for the business in helping shape the narrative and helping promote, where a lot of guys all had this to this day. There's a lot of guys like, "Oh, they were making money off our business." And Eddie didn't see it that way. Eddie seen this as, hey, they're over here helping promote the business. They're helping promote the storylines. And he had a lot of respect for writers and, guys that did the magazines. And he was always very, very friendly with, be it, like Bill and you and guys like that from the magazines, but also the newsletters. It got to the point where, when he leaves somewhere, he would sit down and do interviews. And before shoot interviews were a thing, and back when it was, oh God, don't talk to the sheets, Eddie would sit down and be very open and honest about, hey, here's what happened, here's why I left, and here's what I plan on doing next. And it endeared him to most of those guys. And he also figured out how to use that to his advantage. If he's talking, famously, we've talked about the last time I was on, Continental and Ron Fuller, didn't really work with the magazines and the sheets and stuff very much. He kind of stayed closed off about a lot of that stuff compared to what, Memphis and other promotions did. But Eddie, on the other hand, was calling and telling Dave Meltzer and different people like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how this is working. Here's how the crowd's responding. And so, it gets back to WCW and they start looking for somebody to help with the booking. And they're like, oh, Eddie Gilbert's been tearing it up down there in Alabama. And, it ends up landing him a booking job in WCW where ordinarily they would have had no idea they might have some hearsay. Go like, hey, we heard Eddie Gilbert was booking that Alabama territory down there. But they all read the sheets, whether they admit it or not. They read the sheets. They read the quote unquote Apter mags. They kept up with all that. So, I feel like Eddie used that to his advantage. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. He's just like, hey, I see this tool here. I'm going to use it. And it benefited not only him, but it benefited the magazines and the newsletters and everybody involved.
Let me tell you, I was with PWI when he was in Continental with Heyman. And I would watch these videotapes and my jaw would fall open. I go, we got to do a story on this. We got to do a story. And most of it was revolving around Eddie, like the time that he attacked Pez Whatley's kid.
Yes.
And other angles that were every bit as red flaming hot as that. I mean, they really danced a tightrope, but I saw how the crowds were responding. And I was like, wow, there's something going on here. This is good stuff. And I really thought it was good stuff. And at that point, I was thinking, he could book anywhere he wants. I still don't understand. Well, you say he booked in WCW. Did he actually get a job booking partially WCW? How did that work?
I mean, he was never the booker, but he was on the committee.
Oh, that's right.
He came in. Well, he came in directly with Dusty in early '89, but then right after he gets hired, Dusty gets fired, and then George Scott takes over, and he's kind of Eddie. Then just mostly gets used as a wrestler, but then he ends up on the booking committee. He had influence at different times, but at no point was he ever just
no,
right. But he did have influence, and more than people realized at different times. Even like during like the Flair and Funk feud and stuff like that, he had some say in some of that.
Like I say, during my magazines, it felt like every 6 months there was a new regime in WCW or NWA/WCW. It just felt that way. And because that's exactly what was going on if you go back and look.
Absolutely.
And if they had just calmed down and settled on somebody they wanted, I thought that Kip Fry did a nice job. And then he's gone, and then Bill Watts comes in, and that was somewhat of a disaster. And, all kinds of things were going on, Ron Simmons is your champ. Oh, looks like he's going to be champ for a long time. No, he's not. It's just one thing after another. To me, it was always disjointed.
Yeah.
They would come up with what seemed like a great thing, and then they would throw it away just as fast. So that had to be frustrating for him too, regardless of his job status there. I mean, you probably look around going, "What the heck's going on here? It's chaos."
Yeah, I mean, you could never have any level of comfort because no matter how good today is, you don't know what tomorrow brings in a place like that. And and you had a lot of that in Memphis at times too. He booked there, and then Jerry Jarrett would wake up one morning, or Lawler or whoever, and they'd take him out of it, and they'd take back over. And so, people criticize him now. They look back on it and go, "Oh, every time things didn't go his way, he would just up and leave." And that's one thing about this book is Doug's able to provide like, okay, here's what Eddie was thinking at the time, because I talked to him, I was there. And so there's a little more, insight into what Eddie was thinking when he made some of these moves and left some of these places, and another side of the story that you didn't necessarily know. You just know the narrative that everyone told. So I think that's another reason people will find this book very interesting, because Eddie's not here to tell the story, and Doug's as good as you're going to get. Now and we talk about it in the book. Now Eddie was the very first to do a shoot interview. He did that Bob Barnett shoot interview, and it's awesome that he did, because that's the only way you would have heard straight from Eddie's mouth him explaining a lot of those angles he did, and a lot of the things that had happened in his career up to 1994. Talking about his time in the WWF and the Tiger Mask matches and all that good stuff. You never would have had that, because ordinarily, Eddie would have passed away before that became a thing that people were doing. So I'm really happy that Bob Barnett approached him and that he did that, because that was controversial at the time. Nobody knew that was going to become the way of the world, and everybody would do a shoot interview before it was all said and done. That was a pretty taboo to do at the time, but I'm glad he did, because in writing a book like this, Doug's got a lot of insight, but a lot of things I was able to go back and watch, especially 15 years ago when I was working on this the first time, I could hear it straight out of Eddie's mouth in that interview.
Yeah, boy, it feels like Eddie had 5 different careers. His stint in the WWF, where he was Backlund's protege or something like that, and then he had an injury. And I think they did an angle where his neck was bad, right, in WWE.
Yeah. He did legit get injured, and then they used that for an angle, and then they used that to make him, Bob Backlund's protege, and then Masked Superstar came in and injured him just to kick off a feud with Superstar and Backlund. But yeah, if you take the Eddie Gilbert, the WWF Eddie Gilbert, and then Hot Stuff a couple years later, it's like you say, it's two different people, two different careers.
Oh, yeah.
But that injury necessitated a style change for him, you know, and he couldn't exactly do the style. You know, I think had he not suffered that injury, you might have seen him go to Japan more and have more matches like what you saw with Tiger Mask. And he really, you know, according to Doug, he really enjoyed that style of wrestling, and he was obviously really good at it. He, you know, he went to Puerto Rico and wrestled some of those guys down there and everything, but it really necessitated a change in the way he wrestled. But he certainly continued to bump and do things that, you know, for a guy who had the type of neck injury that he had and to come back as soon as he did, it's pretty amazing that he took the bumps and did the things he did. And it probably wasn't good for his long-term well-being. He probably maybe should have went with like how Watts and people were trying to make him a manager. It probably would have been better for his long-term health to be a manager. But, you know, Bob, I sat at Doug's house when we were working on this book, and I asked him one time, I said, Doug, you know, do you think deep down in your heart that if somebody had told Eddie, hey, if you never wrestle again, if you just manage, if you stay outside the ring, you could probably live a long and healthy life. But if you get inside the ring, your expiration date is going to be 1995. I said, you know, do you think he would have continued to wrestle? And he sat and he thought about it a minute, and he goes, Gene, I think he would. He said, no, in fact, I know he would have. He loved it that much. It meant that much to him. And that's a pretty, you know, bold statement, and says a lot about Eddie and how much he loved the business and what getting to wrestle meant to him.
You know, he had so many facets to his career, too, that people forget how good he was in the ring. I mean, it's like one thing that he did, I hope you look at it the same way. If he got chopped in the chest, he could hit the mat by the time his fingernails were on his skin. He was unbelievably quick doing that. He was one of the best bumpers you'd ever want to see in that regard, and in other ways, too. And he was fantastic as a sneaky. I liked him way better as a heel, personally.
Oh.
You know, I just thought he knew how to get over.
Absolutely. And, you know, we were talking about this on a recent episode. We were talking kind of about Philadelphia wrestling and as it pertained to the Gilberts and Tommy Rich. You know, Eddie, I don't want to say he reinvented himself, because he'd already done this kind of thing, but he kind of reminded everybody that feud with Cactus Jack in 90 and 91 just kind of introduced him to a whole new audience of like, hey, Eddie Gilbert, you know, he's not just this little sneaky manager you saw in WCW, and he's not just, you know what you know him as. Like, he can get out here and he can go and he can have these, you know, hardcore matches, and it's certainly shined a light on Cactus. And, you know, Cactus has said that, you know, it's why he got re-signed by WCW. That feud is what got him re-signed by WCW and created a lot of opportunities for him. And like I said, it meant a lot for Eddie's career as well. And I mean, I interviewed, you know, Bay Ragney, who went on to be Chubby Dudley and is helping put on this, you know, One and Done, who I know you know very well. You know, he said that feud with, you know, Cactus and Eddie is what inspired him to be a wrestler, made him know that that's what he wanted to do. And he could say for a fact that there was a lot of guys that felt that way. And,
you know, I was at the first Tri-State Wrestling Alliance match between Cactus Jack and Eddie, and at the conclusion of the first match, it looks like Eddie is throwing Cactus out the ring, but no, he gets tangled in the ropes, and his head is in between the first and second ropes, and it looks like Eddie is ripping Cactus's hair out, and he's pounding on him and pounding on him, and I literally found myself yelling. I'm at ringside with John Arizzi, and I'm going, "Stop the match!" I meant it.
Yeah.
It looked like he was really getting hurt. And you know what? The whole crowd was in an uproar. And the end result of that match was more national publicity for a match that 2,000 people watched than I've ever seen, mainly because I helped give it that much publicity. I went back to the office and said, man, that match was something else. And then they followed it up with a triple match, I guess. 3 matches on the same night, 3 different gimmick matches. Unbelievable.
You know, everybody argues about who gets credit for it. But to me, those matches is what set the tone and set that whole thing in motion. And speaking of ECW, and we talked about WrestleMania at the beginning of this. I don't know about you, but having, worked on this book and spending as much time as I have, restudying Eddie recently, as I'm watching Paul Heyman being, the focus of that triple threat match on Saturday night at WrestleMania, I can't help but think, to see all the things that Paul Heyman has done and what he means to the business now and what high regard he's held in as far as his abilities, where would Eddie be? Taking away the whatever time he would have spent wrestling between 95 and now, but as a manager or as a creative person behind the scenes, be it just, a writer or a producer, or even in a role like Triple H's, I think that would have been what really made him a Hall of Famer for everybody. Like, I think the things he would have done creatively, would have blew away everything. And he had a great career as a wrestler. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to diminish that, but I'm just saying Eddie Gilbert to me was always 10 years ahead of the rest of the business as a booker and as a talent. And I think that he really would have helped usher in that whole Attitude Era and everything that stemmed from that. I think that that'd have been in his wheelhouse, and I think that he would probably still be at a very high level in the business today creatively had he lived and still be here with us. Am I way off in that, or you think that's fair? Or?
I do. I think it's right, spot on. Absolutely true. I agree wholeheartedly, and it's for that reason that I can't wait to read this book. You're the first author I've had who I haven't read the book first, because the book hasn't been released yet.
Right.
But I am going to grab it, so by the time the show comes out, I will have read it, and I'm really looking forward to it. I wonder if Doug Gilbert remembers that we spent a Saturday night together, and I bet he doesn't remember me. It was in a car being driven by somebody I didn't know, 5 wrestlers, including Lawler and myself, going to West Memphis, Arkansas for a spot show. And we drove together from Memphis and came back to Memphis after that, and we had a great time. But I wonder if he remembers that this interloper in the car with all the wrestlers. But because Lawler had invited me to come on the show in '91, and this was part of all that. And I was meeting Doug. He was so young then. My gosh, was he still in his teens when he started?
Oh yeah. He was right out. It was kind of like Eddie. He was a couple of days past his graduation when he started working. He was already working shots in Memphis when he was 17. Then when he graduated, he went down. Eddie was working for Watts, and he went down to Watts, and was under a hood as the enforcer and was doing jobs on TV and everything. And see, that's something people forget. Me and him talked about this recently. GCW had put him in a senior scramble thing for WrestleMania weekend originally, and that ended up happening. But because him and Tommy became so attached at the hip as tag team partners, people forget Doug's a lot younger than all those guys that he's associated with.
Mm-hmm.
The Memphis Mafia guys. Him and Brian were the 2 youngsters in that bunch. But people think of him like Buddy and Tommy and Eddie and all those guys. They forget that Doug's, quite a bit younger than them. So he would have been probably, maybe by then he might have been 20 or so, depending on what year that was, but not much more than that. But I'm sure he would jog his memory. Me and Tommy talk about all the time what a great memory Doug has about people and details and things. So if right off the bat, you're like, hey, do you remember Bob Smith? He might not, but if you're like, hey, if you were like, hey, remember that van ride to West Memphis, me and Lawler, he would be like, oh yeah, absolutely.
And there was a couple other people in the car too. I just don't remember who they were at this point. I just remember Doug and Lawler. At this point, I'll tell you what, he made a deal with the devil, Doug Gilbert, that he doesn't look any different now, does he? He looks exactly the same as when he was, working Memphis.
And he's getting, he bought a freaking Peloton, and he's been riding that thing. And I told him when I saw him in Corinth, I was like, all right, man, you're going to have to stop. Every time I see you, you're getting in better and better shape, and you're losing weight. And he's like, yeah, my wife told me it's time to stop with the weight loss. I'm almost getting too small, but he's in tremendous shape, and he's out there, man. I sat there in Mississippi, and I watched him tag with Ricky Morton against one of the top heel tag team in EPW Wrestling, a great promotion there in North Mississippi that my buddy Neil Taylor runs. And they had a great match with Doug and Ricky. And I mean, Ricky, look at him. He's still out there, and the crowd loves him. They were the baby faces, and the crowd ate them up. And it was cool to get to sit there and say, what a show they had that night. They had the APA there, and it was a fun night, and they drew a big crowd. But yeah, Ricky Morton's still out there making it happen. I got to sit at the gimmick table there with him and Doug, and watching Ricky work with the fans, and he hasn't missed a step, man. He's still
amazing.
Good old Ricky.
It's amazing. What deal with the devil did these guys make? Because he can still do it. He can still do it. It's like, and there's some people on Facebook. First of all, I'm getting sick of wrestling Facebook. I shouldn't be saying this because I have a lot of friends on wrestling Facebook, but you know what? Ooh, he shouldn't be in the business. He's too old. I bet he sold some tickets. If you can still do it, do it. There's this fiat against guys over 50 still wrestling, and I'm like, why would you even broach that? It's not like he's main eventing WrestleMania. He's doing it because he enjoys it, right?
People are buying tickets to see him.
That's right.
Promoters only book you because there's a demand, and there's only a demand because people are willing to pay to see you. And you haven't created enough new younger stars that people are willing to pay to see. So it creates a market for these older guys. So if you don't like these older guys out there taking spots, well, go out there and get over as much as they did. That's all I can tell these young guys, the ones that are moaning and the fans that are griping. Well, you know what? People they're only there because people want to see them. And if you don't want to see them, then okay, then you don't have to go. But I sat there at that table and watched. They had some of the longest lines, and listening to, and I've gotten to do that a lot in the last year, go to these different conventions and things and hang out with him and Tommy, and another night with him and Ricky, and watching those interactions with the fans, Bob, of like them coming up and, oh my gosh, I watched you and Eddie, or I watched, your dad, and I watched, this and that, and what it means to them just to get a chance to meet those guys, and then just to go out there and see them, have a match. And then, I had a lot of great friends, a lot of the young guys that wrestled, but there's not that connection there like they have to these guys. They just, guys like Doug and Ricky and Tommy Rich, and they connected with fans on a different level. Mm-hmm. That even if these younger guys, they are entertaining, and, it is what it is. They just don't connect with an audience the way these guys do. And, they are locked into these fans' memories. And I'm the same way. When I watch their matches, I think of times in my life that I relate to that. Wrestling's such a big part of my life that everything's tied into wrestling somehow. And you can tell these people that come there to meet them and get these pictures signed, they're the same way. And it means a lot to them to get to talk to them and to get to see them out there in the ring. So as long as they're able to do it, it ain't hurting anybody. And if there's not hurting them. Now, there's some guys you see in the ring, and you're like, guys, don't let them get in there because it's not good for them. Let them do the meet and greet. Let them sign the autographs, but maybe don't let them get in the ring. And, a guy like Ricky Morton, he's in his 60s now. It was less awkward for me to watch Ricky in the ring than it was for me to watch John Cena in the ring on Sunday, to your point earlier. And I'm not exaggerating about that. It's true.
Mm-hmm. I equate older wrestlers to old rock stars. I just saw a guy, a rock and roll singer who was with a famous band, in concert here in Long Island. And this was about a month ago. We went and saw him, and he's 77 years old, right? Mm-hmm. His last hit record was during the Carter administration. All right?
Yeah.
Put on a fabulous show. Is his voice the same now as it was in 1969? No. Was it still the same guy? Did he still sound like him? Yes. So why would you besmirch a gentleman like that from doing what he's always done, and yet berate a wrestler for doing the exact same thing, particularly if he can still perform and not hurt himself doing it, or as somebody else? So I say, keep rocking, Ricky. That's the way I'm going to say it. Keep on rocking, because it's like, you know what? People still love those guys. I was at a convention in Philly 2 years ago where the Rock and Roll Express was there, and they drew a long, long line at their table. So what more can I say is that people love those guys. And they, let me tell you something. Prime Rock and Roll Express, in their primes, one of the major attractions in wrestling for at least 5 consecutive years.
They drew so much money and sold so many tickets. And fans these days, and even wrestlers these days, they hear that phrase, oh, they drew money and stuff. They don't even really understand exactly what that means. Today a show draws 300 people and it's high fives all around on independent shows. They can't fathom that they were able to go to the same places month after month and put 6, 7, 8, 10,000 people in there, to see the Rock and Roll Express month in and month out. And
and they did it without these lengthy builds that they do in today's wrestling. They were able to do it through the realism of their performances and their countenance of their personas, which was thankful in the old days. I think there was a lot more of them in their personas than there are now. I think some people are just play acting. But back then, Ricky Morton was Ricky Morton. That was him.
Yeah.
Right? He wasn't putting on airs. That's what he was like. He's still like that. So give me the veterans, man. Seriously. And you're making me feel kind of all warm and gushy inside. Because you know what? Just thinking of the fact that these guys are still working, that works for me. I would tell you what, if he came, I'm sitting in Long Island right now. If he came down the road, I'd go buy a ticket to see him. No question.
Yeah, man. Because I got to go see the Rock and Roll Express in the 80s in their heyday. And I went and saw Doug and Tommy. I can't tell how many times at the Mid-South Coliseum and different shows, and sitting out there watching that match. It just gave me that warm feeling that I had, back then. It's that's the same feeling those people got seeing that rock and roller you were just talking about a minute ago. It's not just, I'm going to hear this song because I like this song. It's a whole experience and a whole feeling, that a nostalgia that comes back to you that you can't get anywhere else. And that's why I like doing these podcasts, man, because I get that same gushy feeling like you're just talking about. And I enjoy talking about this, and it brings back good memories. And I just, it's a necessary evil. We spent 10 minutes at the beginning talking about WrestleMania, but that wasn't fun. We talked about what we didn't like about it. And
now we're having fun.
Now we're having fun. Now we're happy, and it's a good time,
I a recent show about 2 weeks before this show was going to come out. I had a gentleman named Anthony Pyrus from the Boston area on. He makes the rounds on the podcast, and he does some work in wrestling media. And the whole show was without script, and we just talked about what brought us to the dance as kids, what our first wrestling review, where we went to see wrestling, and what we saw, how it made us feel. By the end of that show, it was the most heartfelt podcast on wrestling I think I've ever felt. We were both getting misty-eyed.
Yeah.
With the great memories we had discovering pro wrestling. And I thought it's one of the best shows I've ever done. It'll be a couple weeks old by the time this comes out. But I will say that that's why I'm doing this stuff. I think you're kind of similar in that regard.
Absolutely.
That feeling never really leaves you as you age. I mean, I'm really old now, and it's like, I still think back with fondness to seeing title changes on TV in 1972. It's like, and it meant something then. It felt important.
Yeah.
If wrestling is done right, it feels important. Even though you were watching it, like, look at Cobo Arena in Detroit, the dingiest arena you'd ever want to go in. But to those fans, that was a palace.
Yeah.
And everything that happened there was important. The Sheik had to get beat this week. Oh, can Bobo Brazil beat the Sheik? People don't feel that way anymore. No. I kind of wish they did.
No, everybody's sitting there going, I wonder who they're going to put over. I wonder.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the way they come in. Nobody's like, I hope Cody Rhodes beats John Cena tonight. It's, I read that John Cena's going to go over and he's going to hold it till the end of his retirement tour. And he's probably going to lose it back to Cody at one of the last pay-per-views. I can't believe nobody's like, I can't believe he won. It's like, I can't believe they put the Intercontinental title on Dominic. Now that crowd in the there live seemed to really get into that, and I got a great reaction. It was pretty incredible. But most people at home were just going, I can't believe they put him over. And that just that whole feeling, and I understand once you're in that mindset, it's hard to get out of it. But that's not the same as what we experienced, back in the day.
Yeah, but you know what? A couple of old farts like us have to remember one thing. There's one thing that wrestling has more of now as an audience base than they did when you and I were younger kids. I'm talking 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids. They're the ones rooting for Cody to win, and they mean it. They don't see it as sophisticatedly as the adults do. The kids are still rooting for the good guys. They really are. Either they're rooting for the bad guys, depending on who the kid is. But you know what I'm saying? Children are different.
I said, I hope just like Santa Claus, like people don't spoil that for them. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Somebody sees them, they're having a good time, like, hey, they know who's going to win. I hope people don't do that to them because, and then people would try to do that to me when I was a kid and I didn't pay any attention. I was like, they don't know what they're talking about. But,
The one thing
I was happy at WrestleMania 3 when Hogan beat Andre. I was like, oh my gosh, Hulkster won, because I was 10 years old. I wasn't like, I can't believe they didn't put Andre over, which is what you would say now.
But, the one thing WWE does, ringing a bell, as perfect as any company that I know could do these things, is that they'll set up appearances with wrestlers with special needs kids or in hospitals and stuff like that. I have seen this with my own eyes, my friend. They do that kind of thing better than any company I can think of. Major League Baseball doesn't even come close to what WWE does in terms of fan outreach, and we tend to forget that. It's the stuff you don't hear about that WWE does. Like I said, I've experienced that on my own. I helped set up something for a company in New York City, to get some stuff for, Make-A-Wish. Unbelievable how they respond. I'm telling you, unbelievable with their generosity and their time and everything else. I mean, they sent for this event probably $45,000 worth of gifts for kids. It was unbelievable to me. It all showed up in huge boxes at this venue, and I was like, everybody was floored. So I don't know what to say other than they do that right. They really do that right.
I mean, I hate to say this out loud, but, the fact of the matter is, to answer your question from earlier, I hope you get to ask Triple H personally. But the answer to that question is, they don't do any of that for guys with gray hair. Because how many dolls are we buying? How many T-shirts are we buying? How many, you know what I mean? Like, we're not who this is marketed towards. And whether we're happy about, who, the way they're presenting it and the way the storyline's playing out and how John Cena's heel character comes off, most of these folks that gripe about it are still going to watch it. So they're going to watch it anyway, but they're not the ones spending the money. Let's focus on the ones that are spending the money, and let's do what we think is going to appeal to them. And the fact of the matter is, it's not for us anymore. And that's why I try to focus on the things that I do like and do these podcasts. Me and Ray Russell have a great time on WrestleCopia on the Patreon, watching the old Coliseum videos. And, and as bad as some of those are, it's, we spent an hour and a half watching best of Captain Lou.
Recently. All bad, all right.
But we still had a good time. It's things like what Ray's doing with WrestleCopia. To me, I like to focus my attention and time on that. For people like us who want to relive that, there are places to do it. And Monday Night Raw's unfortunately not the place. But luckily for us, there are people like us and like Ray Russell and like, all the people that they're out there creating product and content that old fuddy-duddies like us can enjoy.
But, if I were to talk to Triple H, it wouldn't be like as an accusation, but you're not doing things. You're not doing things. No, I'm not there to criticize. I just want to know where older fans fit in, or if they fit in their mindset.
Yeah. Is there a way to bridge the gap?
Is there a way to bridge the gap? Why would you... After I gotta tell you, after the first night of WrestleMania, I didn't even want to watch the second night of it. I really didn't. I was just so upset at the main event that to me was senseless and crazy that it was like, all the psychology that I grew up watching is gone. That's for dang sure. It's not there anymore. And I'm a fool if I ever thought it would ever come back. It's not going back to the Armory where I used to watch it. Things have changed. That's fine. I do kind of take umbrage at a $8,000 ringside seat, though. I can't even equate that in my mind. I can't even understand that in my mind. How much is enough money?
But to me, that's the TKO influence. They own UFC, and UFC's been on that. They've been making crazy money off their seats for a long time. And I think when they bought it, they're like, "Hey guys, you're missing the boat. We can charge, but whole families aren't going to the UFC." I'm not taking my kids to go see a bludgeoning at UFC, but now I can't afford to take my kid to WrestleMania. If I want them to go to college, we're just going to sit at home and watch it,
Exactly. I mean, this is what bothers me. You got a family of four, just a normal American family, right? And you want to get a mediocre seat just so you can see the ring. You're not asking for ringside. And for WrestleMania, you're probably out $1,200-$1,500 for upper deck seats.
Yep.
4 of them. Then if the kid wants a T-shirt, there's another $45, or how much arena food costs. So you're looking at a couple of $1,000s to go and enjoy a night like that. Now, some people can afford it, but not everybody can. The great equalizer of wrestling back in my days that everybody could afford it. It was really true. When I went, you never even think about how much tickets were in the old days. Now, am I sound like an old fart? Yep. But, and I'm not against, people making a profit. I just wonder if people are going to see the publicity on Facebook and other places about how much fans spent and what they got for their money. People aren't dumb. And, the economy ain't great right now, and it isn't going to get any better in the next 6 months. So the question is, are they going to be able to continue to pack these arenas like they have? Because I can't see where the money's coming from.
I don't know. I don't know how people afford to do it. And to me, this is a time for the independents to try to thrive. Like, sell yourselves as, hey, we know you can't afford to take your family to a WWE event. Come on down to our show. We're not going to charge you an arm and a leg, and we'll have a family friendly atmosphere, and we're not going to go out there and do anything too crazy and dangerous in the ring. We're not going to say anything, that the kids shouldn't hear. And, independents should really focus on it and really drive that home right now, because it's their opportunity to use that to their advantage.
You must live in a good area, because I'll tell you what, there are still federations. I use that word too much. There's still organizations, small organizations that do indie wrestling that specializes in death matches and stuff like that, where it's sheer carnage, backyard stuff.
Yeah.
But they charge people to go. Imagine dragging a kid to wrestling, not knowing what you're going to see or who the wrestlers are. And then you end up see somebody use a blowtorch on somebody else and hit him over the head with a fluorescent light tube. Those people are never going to come back to see professional wrestling. If they don't know what they're seeing going in, they're never going to go back a second time. I just saw a video on YouTube of some indie dope putting lighter fluid all over a folding chair and threw it out of the ring into where the fans were, and it almost was a tragedy. A bunch of people started stamping on the chair. They had to drag the chair outside to get it, to stop burning. And I'm hearing the terrified screams of children in the background. And I'm like, you idiots. I don't know what to say. That's, something, I'll get on my soapbox, damn it. That stuff needs to be eradicated. That's not professional wrestling. It's not. These things where the guys are, syringing their mouths and cutting each other open with, weed eaters. Come on.
Yeah.
It's time to abolish that nonsense. I'm sorry. There's no skill in it. It's just, if that stuff doesn't kill off wrestling, you know why? You know what'll kill off wrestling? If one of them kills each other doing it, which is entirely conceivable.
It's a miracle it hasn't happened. When you hear some of the ignorant things, I used to do commentary for a show, and I eventually quit for a guy here in Alabama who would book like old Continental guys like the Armstrongs and Dr. Tom Pritchard and guys like that, which would draw in the old school fans and it would draw in families. Then he would mix in death matches, like straight up death matches in the middle of the show. And these people are here, I want to see Bullet Bob wrestle, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's a barbed wire, broken glass light tube match in the middle of this. And that's one of the few times where I was like, well, thank God Alabama got a commission and was able to shut that stuff down. That's the one time that I agree, even though it's a money grab for the most part. But they were able to stop. He had to start doing his shows like out in the field somewhere, and it was by invitation only, and just to get away with doing that kind of crap. But he killed it. There was a town the first time we went in, he drew like 700 people. And then by the end of the night, everybody had left, and he came back 3 months later and he drew like 75 people because that deathmatch stuff had run everybody off.
There has never been a viable deathmatch promotion that made money ever. I don't care what anybody says. It doesn't exist. Nope. And I'll tell you something. But even the old school promoters sometimes were stupid. There's a video somewhere on YouTube. It's several years old now, quite old, of a high school card, and it shows a guy and his son, little son, maybe about 12 years old, right? And then watching all these old favorites wrestle, just like you were talking about. It's great. And then what's the main event? Abdullah the Butcher versus Tommy Riddick. And the match essentially was Abby, who couldn't even get in the ring at this point, dragging Tommy in the apron and jabbing him with a foreign object until how Tommy can go like a gusher if he wants to. That's all this was. And people were like, what happened? We were having a nice time watching this wrestling, and this looks like somebody trying to murder somebody else. That is ignorance on the part of the promoter booking Abby in the first place to play a high school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And those guys are every bit as much as fault. You got to know who your audience is. If you're booking a high school, you shouldn't do any, well, to be honest, a little blood would be all right, but you know what Abby's act was like. It was like, a guillotine. So I don't know what to say other than wrestling shoots itself in the foot far too often.
And when Abby gets to the point where he can't get in the ring, number one, you shouldn't be booking him to wrestle.
Right.
But to make up for the fact that he can't get in the ring, he started going even more over the top with the blood and guts to try to make up for that, which made it even worse because he's even closer to the fans because they're not in the ring. So they're right there. There's a lot wrong with that.
I just think, I wasn't Abdullah the Butcher fan. I was always kind of in awe of his whole shtick. I thought he was very realistic in portraying a maniac. However, he stuck around a decade too long. And they kept booking him. Even though he couldn't even climb the ring steps, they kept booking him just to jab somebody. Yeah. To me, the entertainment value is if there's no match around it, there's no entertainment value. So, again, I admire Abby for what he did in his career. I just think, don't repel the audience that paid money to come and see your show. That's just ignorance on the part of some of these promoters.
Time all night long. But the last thing they left there remembering is seeing a guy what they perceived to probably nearly bleed to death in front of them after being stabbed multiple times with a blunt.
I am sure this video is still on YouTube somewhere. And it's and they asked the kid later, I guess they're at home, he goes, I loved the whole show, but the end made me sick. So I don't know what to say other than promoters, you got to be smarter than that, man. Yeah. Even you and these guys out there. I know some of you are still doing that stuff. Be smart. Try to attract a general audience. They'll come back because wrestling draws you back. If you're 15 years old like you and I were and you saw a good show, did you come the next month? Bet you did.
I begged my parents, I got to be there. I got to see what happens next.
Exactly. It holds you, and it holds you for the rest of your life. That's how good it is. So, speaking of good, your podcast is something else too. The do I pronounce it right? The Retro Wrestling Review.
Yeah. We put that dash in there for a reason because we're.
But am I pronouncing it right? Because it's the way I pronounce it. Anyway.
Yeah. That's the intention because it's like we're doing reviews, but we're going back and reviewing the show because me and those guys watched USWA back in the day, but we're watching it now and giving reviews from today, compared to how we felt about it back then, and it's not all roses, there's stuff, there's been times during this year where we've been covering 1993 and we're all the way in November now. And, there were episodes of USWA 93 where every match on the show had interference. Like we were complaining about WWE. Every single match had a run in, we at the end of the show. So we watched the TV for people who's never seen it. We watched that. We don't watch it. It's not a watch along. We're not watching it in real time, but we watch the show and then we sit down and do a review of it. We play some clips of it. And at the end of the show, I'll ask the guys, my two co-hosts, I go, okay, based on today's show, what was your least favorite part of the episode? What was your most favorite part of the episode? And of course, you've always got where they run down the card for Monday night. I'll say, and based on everything that happened in this show, would you have bought a ticket in 1993 to go to this card on Monday night? And they'll either say, yeah, I'd go see this one, or I think I'd sit this one out. And then we go through the results of what happened on Monday night. And man, we hit cards where out of 7 matches, 5 matches ended in either a DQ or a run-in or some, non-finish. Right. And most of those shows has an attendance. And as you look, the more screwy the finishes got on TV and on Monday night, the more the attendance just dwindles down. So there's something to that. But we have a lot of fun with it. We do some impressions and silly stuff on there. My buddy Richard does stand-up comedy as well. And they have a podcast, P3 Radio, where they, have a good time.
And so do you. I had no idea that you will grab a mic and have the boldness to go in front of a bunch of people and tell some jokes. Tell me about that aspect of your career. I had no idea.
Yeah, well, I don't talk about a lot on these type of shows, but back in, I guess it was probably 2006. I did independent wrestling from like 97 up and through, into the 2000s. And then I started getting to where I was like, I don't know, I really ain't in shape for this anymore, but I had to have something to scratch that creative itch. And I always loved comedy. As a kid, I loved professional wrestling and I loved comedy. Like when I was a little kid, I used to turn it on Cinemax, and this isn't popular to say now, but we didn't know about him back then. But I watched that stand-up comedy special, Bill Cosby himself, like every day for like a year. I used to be able to quote that. And eventually, as I got older, then I started, like guys like, George Carlin and, all the different great comedians of the time. And so, my ex-wife hated wrestling, so I stopped wrestling. And so, I started writing columns online, and in 2007, I started my first version of a podcast. But, we went to a comedy show at the Stardome in Birmingham, the big comedy club, one of the first comedy clubs in America, as a matter of fact. We went to a show, and as we were leaving, they had a flyer in the lobby that said open mic night in 2 weeks. And I thought, open mic night. I said, can anybody do that? And the guy said, yeah, anybody can sign up and come do it. So, all right. So I come up with a couple of minutes of material and went and did the open mic night and did okay, but had a good time. And I did it, started doing the open mic nights for a while and did it for a few years. And then my job changed and I couldn't really do it with my work schedule. And I kind of didn't do it for a long time. And then here several years ago, I started back and I got to where I was doing it quite a bit. And I was starting to travel around a bit and, do it in Huntsville and Birmingham and Chattanooga, Tennessee and different places. And I had another change in my job, my work schedule, and it made it kind of hard to travel around to be in Huntsville at, on a Wednesday night. And then I got to be to work the next day at 7 a.m. So I stopped doing it as much. And that's when I really started focusing on these podcasts. And, I was doing the Memphis 85 one with Ray Russell, and I started the USWA one. And then I started the one with Doug and Tommy, and then I started one on my own on YouTube, and it gets out of hand. You know how it is, Bob. You do one, and one's not enough because you can't really talk about this thing on that one. So I want to talk about this, and I'll start another one. But they're all doing fairly well. People seem to enjoy them. I do on the YouTube one. I review different shows. 93 USWA, we're just doing USWA, and then with Ray, we're just doing 85 Memphis. On the YouTube one, I can kind of jump around and do different things from different eras, and then sometimes I interview people. I can kind of do whatever I want. But man, you guys that do interviews every week, kudos to you, man. I have to alternate between interviews and review shows because scheduling interviews and working around everyone else's schedule, especially if you do multiple podcasts, you deserve an award. It's challenging, to put it nicely.
No, it's like, I can't tell you the number of times you get last minute cancellations or something came up and you don't hear about it until like you're sitting here in a studio waiting for somebody. We're in a digital studio here. And then you find out that they can't do it that night. It's happened at least 25 times. But you grin and bear it because, I was in the wrestling business before and I realized people aren't particularly reliable in this business. I hate to say it, but it's true. So I take it all with a grain of salt. I do this things of labor of love. It's not like they're taking money out of my pocket, millions of dollars out of my pocket. So, you roll with the punches and you got to remember you're doing this because you love it. That's the main thing. I think it's the same thing with you too. It's like you do it because you really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now, before I want you to sign off telling people how to get your book, how to find you, the whole 9 yards. WrestleCopia.com. We'll start with that because you can find me there too. But I have one more Eddie Gilbert anecdote and it popped in my head during this conversation.
Awesome.
It's Halloween 1990. I'm in New York City working with Bill Apter and the crew at PWI. And my brother calls. We're having he's a musician. He had a band. He goes, why don't you come and sing with the band? Because I was a singer back then. But you got to wear a Halloween costume. I went, oh, geez, I don't know. He goes, just find something. So I go, okay, I'll come. So I'm in the office and I go into our main closet where we keep the coats. And I go, Bill Apter.
Yeah.
Where'd this come from? Oh, Eddie Gilbert gave that to me. It was a literal hot stuff ring jacket.
Oh, wow.
It said hat stuff in the back with the flames and all that stuff. And I said, you still got those real, and he was friends with Mil Mascaras too. I said, you have that mask? He said, yeah. I said, can I borrow these two things for Halloween? He said, sure. So I went with a Mil Mascaras match on and a hot set Eddie Gilbert ring jacket on. And it looked great, and it fit perfect. Me and Eddie must have been the same width because at that point
Yeah.
it fit like a glove. And I forget what I used for tights or whatever, but I went as a wrestler. And people were impressed. You know, if I wasn't such a horrible body, disgusting body, I think people would have been more impressed with it. But I'll tell you, it was fun. So I actually wore one of Eddie Gilbert's
Oh, wow.
ring jackets.
That's cool.
And I'm
'Cause
sure
Eddie
after
had
he
some
saw
really
it-
cool gear. Like, those were some nice jackets. Doug's got a few
I don't know
of
how
those.
Bill ended up with it, but he did. It somehow was just hanging in the closet next to everybody's coats.
Yeah.
So I figured there's my Halloween costume. I put 2 and 2 together and actually
What a
wore the same
combo.
thing that Eddie Gilbert once wore. Amazing. Gene, congratulations on the book. Please tell people where to get it. Please tell people where they can find you and all your work. The floor is yours. Hype away.
All right. Well, the least expensive means to get the book, because the shipping is included in the price, you can go to tinyurl.com/Eddie Gilbert book. And that's buying it directly from the publisher. It cuts out all the middlemen. Now, you can also go to any, I'll say, reputable booksellers, barnesandnoble.com, booksamillion.com, amazon.com, type in Eddie Gilbert book, and it's available through most all booksellers, and it's going to be in stores soon. So any of those means, however you get your hands on it, by all means, we're happy. And if you run into me and Doug anywhere, we'll both happily sign it and tell you some stories from it. But yeah, that's where you can find the book. DougGilbertPodcast.com is where you can find Dangerous Conversations and all things related to Doug and Tommy and myself and the podcast. There's a ton of great links there. And a link to buy the book is there as well. A link to get Gilbert family t-shirts are all there. As for my USWA podcast, you can go to uswapodcast.com, and there's all kinds of great links there, merch, the show, everything else, personal Facebook and all that's there. Also for my YouTube show and also my YouTube channel, you can go to youtube.com/@retro wrestling archive. We're rocking on towards like 3,000 videos there. Just any territory you can name. We've got all kinds of great old archive wrestling there, plus my podcast and different things.
Really?
Yes,
How
tons
did
of
I miss that?
Yeah, check it out.
I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing tonight. Good gravy, man. You're speaking my language now. That sounds awesome.
We're adding stuff all the time over there. So, and then of course, WrestleCopia.com. You can find my podcast there. You can find Bob's podcast there. All the great podcasts that Ray Russell puts on. And of course, over on his Patreon, he has a lot of video casts. I do the Coliseum videos with him and some of the old pay-per-views. And so, like I said, he does really great stuff, and I'm proud to be associated with him and with great podcasts like the Outdated Wrestling Hour with my good buddy Bob Smith. And man, thank you once again for having me on here. It's always a blast to get to talk wrestling with you. And I got to get you back on my show, and we'll might pick something out to review and talk about on there.
Anytime. And I will concur that Ray Russell, the prolific Ray Russell, as I call him, I tell him that too. He is, he knows why. He is hardest working man in showbiz. I mean, recently too, he was under the weather and still managed to not miss deadlines on all this stuff, which knocked me out because he's got so many irons in the fire, and he's really good at what he does, and he's a good podcaster. And if you haven't checked out WrestleCopia.com, you're missing out. There's so many flavors.
Yes.
WrestleCopia is like a good salad. There's a flavor there you're gonna like, maybe several flavors, and the podcasts are all real good. And I'm very happy to be associated with everybody involved, including you, Gene. It's good getting to know you, man.
Well, you too, man. And that's the Eddie Gilbert book's not going to be the last one. Spoiler, me and Tommy Rich are working towards getting a book written about Tommy. And I'm going to be meeting with the publisher in Philadelphia at this event coming up about some more books with some of their different talent in the future. So I guess this is going to be a thing that I'm going to be adding to my list of things to do. Is not only all these podcasts, but I'm going to be writing more books. So hopefully people enjoy them. And what a great one to start with, right? Eddie Gilbert. So
Absolutely. And I keep saying it, 2025 is going to be the greatest year for wrestling books ever. I mean this. Between you and Brian Solomon and Ian Douglas and Keith L.A. Greenberg's book about the third WrestleMania and everything else, it's already been a banner year, and it's only April, or May by the time this comes out. So thanks again, Gene. It's good to see you. You want me on your show? Just, you know where I am, man. It would be my honor and privilege to do it once again. And continued success, and I hope you sell 1 million books.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. And yes, I will be reaching out to you soon to get you back on my show as well. Thanks you again for the opportunity.
No sweat. Folks, it's Gene Jackson. Nobody else like him. Thanks again. Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. It is always an absolute pleasure talking to Gene Jackson. Great when I run into him. I was blissfully unaware until just recently that he was working on that project with Doug Gilbert. And the result is a brand new book about Eddie Gilbert. If you're like me, you're going to run to buy. I have already made an electronic order for it, and I can't wait to get it. And hopefully it'll come in the mail very, very, very soon. And it's what a year for wrestling books. I'll say it again. Unbelievable. We're so glad you joined us again for the Outdated Wrestling Hour with myself and Joe Puccio, who always does such a spectacular job. You can find him at GenerationXWire.com. Our website, OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. All of our episodes are there. Just click and enjoy. You can find most of our recent episodes as well at WrestleCopia.com, the podcast network we are so proudly affiliated with. Write to us, OutdatedWrestling@gmail.com. Also on our website, which is OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com, there's information on the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. For a nominal fee, you can help perpetuate the ongoing adventures of this program, as well as the Outdated Entertainment Hour, our sister podcast. That's all on the website, OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. Check it out today. No matter where you hear the Outdated Wrestling Hour, be it on our website or on any of the more than, I believe, 35 podcast apps we're available on. We're available just about everywhere. Please subscribe. It really does help, and we would love it if you could leave a review or anything else on all your favorite sites. We appreciate you out there. We really do. No kidding. I am a little remiss in mentioning something here, and I hope that you will follow up on this because I get this question all the time. That theme song, I love it. Where's it from? Well, the musician who wrote and composed and the gentleman who performs it is Moran Ron Barron, also known professionally sometimes as MRB. The song's called Funky Bone, and he's available all over the place. You can hear some of his music on Facebook, YouTube. I notice he's on Instagram. He's got a website. All right. It's Moran-Ron-Barron Jim Dufree. That's JIMDOFREE.com. And you can learn a lot more about him there. Just a great musician, can play every style in the book. He's a fine musician. I'm glad to have his unbelievably funky song as our opening and closing theme. And as I've mentioned a few times, at the end of every episode, we're going to play the entire song in case you like it. If you don't, want to hear a full song, which is, I guess, about 3 minutes in length, just shut it off at the end of the talking, at the end of the show. I always usually say Peace and Love by Ringo Starr, which I will say at the end of this announcement, too. But in any event, that's our song. It's called Funky Bone, and it's by Moran, Ron, Barron. It confuses me a little bit. I'll tell you why. On one of my early bands, I had a guitar player named Jim Moran, who was our lead guitarist. And it's like every time I see it, I go, am I pronouncing this right? So in any event, yeah, check him out. It's just a great, great musician. The Outdated Wrestling Hour is part of the WrestleCopia podcast network. Both the Outdated Wrestling Hour and the Outdated Entertainment Hour are productions of Bob Smith Podcasts. That is it for now. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming up, as always. Trying to come at you every Friday here, weekly. And like, again, let me explain that too for podcast newcomers and whatnot. When I say we come out on Friday, that means the show is released to our podcast host on Friday. The host then distributes it to all the podcast apps like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, everywhere that you get your podcasts, iTunes, whatever's out there, right? Now, not everyone works as fast as every other one does. The big ones tend to get it within about an hour after it is posted. The rest of them take their doggone sweet time. I've heard from fans of other apps, I didn't get it till Saturday or I didn't get it till Sunday. That's on them because we're released to the world every Friday at midnight. Doesn't mean you'll hear it Friday at midnight. You may hear it about 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, a half hour later, an hour later, 2 days later. It's up to the other individual podcast apps. But on our website, which is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, we are out at the stroke of midnight every Friday. That's, strike of midnight, Friday EST, of course. We emanate out of New York City, so that's the story with that. In any event, we're really enjoying bringing these shows to you. We hope you enjoy them just as much. My name is Bob Smith. I used to write for Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a bunch of other wrestling magazines. Joe Puccio still writes for GenerationXWire.com. We are the hosts of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Please come back next week. And as Ringo Starr says, peace and love.